The night fell like a velvet curtain over the endless Pacific, darkness absolute, broken only by the faint glimmer of distant stars and the soft whisper of waves against steel hulls. Out here, far from any land, the ocean felt infinite, a black maw ready to swallow anything that dared cross it. And in 1942, as the world burned in the fires of global conflict, the night became something far more dangerous than the day. It became a hunter, and those who sailed its restless surface knew, deep in their bones, that death had found a new cloak, darkness. Before 1942, naval warfare had been a study in daylight precision. Fleets maneuvered with the sun as their ally, scanning for the glint of a mast, the rise of a funnel on the horizon. Gunfire tore across open water, shells arcing in sunlight, chaos visible to all. But things were changing, somewhere in the quiet laboratories of steel and strategy. The night was being weaponized, turned into a domain where surprise and, at first, the signs were almost imperceptible. A radar pulse here, a new torpedo there. But for the men on the decks of destroyers and cruisers, these innovations would soon feel like magic, and magic in war is lethal. The origin of this shift lay not just in technology, but in necessity. Japan's early victories had stunned the Allied navies. Pearl Harbor, a day seared into memory, showed how a single, calculated strike, launched under the cover of dawn, could cripple the greatest fleet in the Pacific. Yet, for every Japanese destroyer prowling the night, the Americans and their allies began to adapt. By 1942, both sides were experimenting with something once thought impossible, fighting the ocean blind, but with eyes sharper than any human could muster. Radar, sonar, high-speed torpedoes, these became the tools of the new darkness. Ships that once relied on sight now depended on pulses of invisible energy, crews learning to trust machines as much as their instincts. And still, nothing could prepare them for the terror that awaited once the sun slipped below the horizon. The Guadalcanal campaign became the proving ground. In dense, tropical nights, mist curling over the water like living smoke, fleets collided in a symphony of fire and steel. The Battle of Savo Island in August 1942 was a nightmare made real. Japanese cruisers gliding through the darkness with lethal grace, guns erupting without warning. For American sailors, it was as if the night itself had turned against them. Ships became fireballs, metal twisted, smoke-choking decks, men screaming as they plunged into the cold, merciless sea. The darkness did not discriminate. It swallowed friend and foe alike. And in that chaos, one truth became painfully clear. Whoever mastered the night would command the Pacific. But technology alone wasn't enough. The human element. Sailors navigated by more than charts. They navigated by instinct, by sound, by the faint hum of a sonar echo. Fear was constant. Every shadow on the water could hide a torpedo. Every ripple might signal an approaching destroyer. Sleep became a stranger, replaced by a tension that threaded through every moment. And in this crucible, courage took on a new meaning. Ordinary men became hunters in the dark, reflexes sharpened, minds attuned to the slightest cues of battle. Some froze in terror. Others found themselves exhilarated by the deadly dance unfolding under cover of night. The night also demanded creativity. Traditional formations were abandoned. Cruisers and destroyers learned to spread wide, weave unpredictable patterns. Aircraft carriers, once vulnerable giants in daylight, became mobile fortresses, their planes the eyes and fists of commanders, daring enough to strike before dawn. Torpedo attacks, once haphazard and reliant on sight, evolved into coordinated symphonies of destruction, guided by radar and precise timing. And everywhere, the hum of engines, the crack of guns, the hiss of torpedoes slicing through water became part of an invisible choreography that determined life or death. In October 1942, the Battle of Cape Esperance brought these lessons into sharp relief. Under a moonless sky, an American task force intercepted a Japanese bombardment group. Chaos reigned at first. Shells whistled past in the unseen. Radar flickered. The night seemed infinite, but slowly the Americans adapted. Torpedoes were fired by instrument rather than sight, gunners trusting machines to locate the enemy. By night's end, Japanese ships burned, smoke painting ghostly silhouettes against the horizon. It was the first hint that the tide might be turning. The night, long a realm of fear and unpredictability, could be mastered, and yet the victory came at a cost. Ships were lost, men died, and the shadows of the dead stretched long across the water. Amid these battles, human stories emerged intimate and unforgettable. A young sailor crouched in a destroyer's bow, gripping cold steel, praying the torpedoes would miss. A captain, heart-hammering, calling coordinates to gunners he could not see, trusting instinct over vision. Radio operators, eyes strained over dim dials, listening for the faintest warning of incoming fire. Letters home went unsent, promises broken by duty and fear, and every night carried the weight of uncertainty. The ocean had become a living thing, capricious and merciless, yet alive with a strange rhythm that only those who endured it could understand. And the men, forged in fire and salt, became part of that rhythm, courage echoing long after the guns fell silent. But even as mastery grew, so did the horror. Night combat revealed a new vulnerability, the impossibility of seeing death until it struck. Men were taken before they could react, ships ripped apart by torpedoes that seemed to come from nowhere. Fires raged uncontrolled, blotting out the stars, and survivors floated among the wreckage, ghosts of a world that had known the sun but had learned to fear darkness. Every battle left scars, not just on steel, but on the souls of those who fought. The night demanded respect, demanded vigilance, demanded sacrifice, and every victory came tinged with grief. By the close of 1942, it was clear naval warfare had changed forever. Lessons learned in Guadalcanal, Cape Esperance, and the endless Pacific reverberated through every fleet. Commanders wrote new doctrines, crews trained in new techniques, and machines became extensions of human will. The night was no longer merely absence of light, it was a weapon, a realm to dominate, a silent adversary that could no longer be ignored. And the men who sailed it knew survival depended not just on skill, but on courage, adaptability, and an unyielding resolve to face the unknown. And yet, for all the technological marvels and tactical brilliance, the human cost was ever present. Names etched on plaques, medals awarded posthumously, families forever changed. These were the echoes of nights deadlier than any day. As the war pressed on, the shadow of 1942 lingered. Every engagement, every midnight clash, carried the memory of those first terrifying nights when the ocean seemed alive, when darkness had teeth, and when men learned that in the theater of war, the unseen was often the deadliest. The early months of 1943 brought no respite. The lessons of 1942 had been hard-earned, yet the ocean seemed eager to test them again. The Solomons became a proving ground, a stage where steel leviathans prowled like predators across a vast black theater. Nights were thick with mist, with rain, and with the electric hum of anticipation. Each patrol, each sortie, carried the weight of unseen eyes, the certainty that somewhere, just beyond the horizon, death waited patiently. For sailors, night had become more than the absence of light. It was a living threat, a crucible of fear and adrenaline that tested every instinct. The Battle of Tassafaronga in November 1942 had left scars not just on the ships, but etched into minds. The American destroyers, sleek and fast, had set out as hunters, only to find themselves the hunted. Japanese torpedoes, long perfected and silently lethal, struck with devastating accuracy. Explosions tore through holes like thunderclaps, and in the aftermath, men clung to floating wreckage, faces blackened by smoke, eyes wide with disbelief. The water was a graveyard, each ripple a reminder of how fragile life at sea truly was. For those who survived, the night spoke a terrifying truth. Speed and firepower alone could not conquer the darkness. You had to respect it, understand it, almost commune with it if you hoped to survive. And so, American commanders adapted. Radar, once crude and unreliable, became their eyes in the abyss. Operators studied blips on faintly glowing screens, translating pulses into action, learning to tell friend from foe in a world without sight. Destroyer captains plotted maneuvers by instrument rather than intuition, trusting numbers over what they could see. Yet even as machines guided them, the human heart remained at the center of survival. Men on deck felt the vibrations of approaching engines, sensed the pressure of water shifting beneath their hulls, whispered warnings across darkened decks. Each night was a lesson in vigilance, a test of nerve, a negotiation with an enemy that could not be seen. By early 1943, night engagements had grown in scale. Entire task forces moved under moonless skies, aircraft carriers launching planes that themselves became ghosts in the dark, scouting ahead, striking before detection. Cruisers and destroyers carved intricate patterns through the black, spreading torpedo screens, exchanging fire with enemy ships they could hear but not see. The cacophony of battle explosions, metal screaming, the roar of guns was punctuated by eerie silences, moments when the world seemed to hold its breath, leaving only the water and the waiting. Amid this chaos, human stories unfolded like fragile flowers in a storm. A gunner, hands blistered, eyes straining through darkness, fired at targets he could not see, guided by voice, instrument, and instinct. A signalman deciphered coded messages, each one a potential lifeliner, a harbinger of doom. Young sailors, barely out of adolescence, learned that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the act of moving forward despite it. And in the quiet corners of the ships, medics tended wounds that would never fully heal, both physical and emotional, while letters to loved ones went unsent, swallowed by the night, along with the moans of the dying. Japanese sailors, too, experienced night in all its terror and beauty. Their destroyers, the so-called Tokyo Express, glided like shadows across the waves, delivering troops and supplies with a precision born of training and tradition. They embraced night as an ally, exploiting every nuance of stealth and surprise. Torpedoes, the fabled long lands, moved silently through the water, invisible daggers seeking the heart of unsuspecting vessels. Yet they, too, feared the unseen. American radar became a new predator, hunting them as relentlessly as they hunted others. Night, once their domain, had become contested, a realm where the balance of power shifted with every encounter. The human toll was staggering. Sailors discovered that heroism often meant improvisation, patching ruptured bulkheads, extinguishing fires with hand pumps, pulling the injured from slick decks, all while explosions continued around them. Ships were not just metal and machinery, they were homes, prisons, crucibles. Each creaking beam, each groaning hull, was a reminder of vulnerability. The ocean demanded respect, demanded sacrifice, exacted a toll that could never be measured in numbers alone. Men returned from night battles, changed, eyes haunted by flashes of fire on water, by the sound of metal screaming under impact, by the sight of comrades swallowed by the sea. The climactic battles of Guadalcanal in late 1942 and into 1943 became the apogee of this transformation. Night engagements were no longer rare or random. They were orchestrated, deliberate, lethal. Commanders on both sides had learned to blend technology, intuition, and courage, creating a deadly choreography where timing and positioning were as critical as firepower. Radar-directed gunnery allowed American forces to strike before the enemy could respond. Japanese torpedo tactics sought to counter, using maneuverability and stealth to penetrate defenses. The result was a deadly ballet, each movement a question of life or death, victory or annihilation. Amid strategy and machines, the human dimension remained raw and immediate. Men scribbled diary entries on scraps of paper, recording fleeting thoughts while explosions shook their ships. Letters were penned to wives, sisters, mothers, never knowing if they would survive to deliver them. In battle, sailors formed bonds forged in fire, a quick hand to steady a comrade, a shared glance of understanding, the silent acknowledgement that each man's survival depended on the other. When ships were struck, when fire and water consumed them, these bonds became lifelines, the difference between sinking into despair and clinging to hope. By mid-1943, the patterns of night combat were understood, yet the danger never diminished. Each sortie carried the same uncertainty, the same tension, the same risk of sudden death. The ocean, indifferent and eternal, continued to test those who dared traverse it after dark. Yet humanity adapted. Crews became skilled at interpreting radar blips, coordinating attacks in near-complete darkness, transforming fear into action. Night, once a realm of terror, became a proving ground where ingenuity, courage, and resilience were measured in real time. And through it all, the psychological strain was immense. Sleep a luxury, tension a constant companion, the shadow of the unknown a persistent reminder that mastery over the night was never absolute. Even as tactics evolved, the cost remained stark. Wrecked ships littered the Pacific, reminders of victories bought dearly. Survivors spoke in hushed tones of nights when the sea seemed alive, when explosions erupted without warning, when comrades disappeared into the black with nothing more than a scream carried away by the wind. The night demanded respect, demanded vigilance, demanded sacrifice. Those who endured emerged hardened, their understanding of the ocean and of humanity's capacity for courage profoundly changed. It was during these months that the concept of combined arms in night combat truly took shape. Aircraft, ships, and radar systems became integrated, a network of detection and destruction. Planes took off in darkness to locate enemy vessels, relay positions, and sometimes strike before returning to carriers. Destroyers executed coordinated torpedo attacks with precise timing, crews trusting instruments, experience, and one another. The theater of war had expanded. Night was no longer a passive setting, it had become an active battlefield where the rules were constantly rewritten, and failure brought immediate, absolute consequences. Amid all this, ordinary moments of heroism emerged, often unnoticed in the grand sweep of history. A sailor diving into oily water to rescue a comrade, a radio operator holding his post despite incoming fire, a captain refusing to abandon ship until every man had evacuated. These acts, repeated across the Pacific, small beacons of humanity in the brutal calculus of naval warfare. And for those who survived, the memory of night battles was indelible, etched into muscle memory, into dreams, into the very way they moved through the world. By late 1943, night had ceased to be merely a backdrop. It had become a battlefield in its own right. The Pacific stretched out like a dark chessboard, each fleet a piece moving in silence, each ship a potential sacrifice in the relentless pursuit of dominance. American and Japanese commanders had learned to exploit every shadow, every ripple, every subtle heartbeat of the ocean. Yet mastery of the night remained imperfect. For every hard-won victory, there was loss. For every carefully calculated maneuver, fate could intervene without warning. And in that uncertainty lay both the terror and the strange poetry of naval warfare. The naval battle of Guadalcanal, fought under moonless skies, became the ultimate testament to this deadly evolution. Two fleets approached one another, guided only by faint radar echoes and whispers of intelligence. Sailors braced themselves, hands clutching rails slick with seawater, hearts hammering in rhythm with the distant thrum of engines. Torpedoes cut through the black like serpents, their deadly arcs invisible until they struck. Explosions lit the night in blinding flashes, leaving after images of fire and smoke that no eye could follow for long. Ships shuddered, groaned, screamed under the assault, metal tearing as though the ocean itself conspired to swallow them. Amid this chaos, men fought with a clarity born of desperation. Every order, every glance, every action could mean the difference between survival and oblivion. On one American destroyer, a young sailor named Thomas crouched beside the gun turret, feeling the vibrations of each blast, listening to shouts and cries all around him. He could not see the enemy, could not know which ship would burn next, yet instinct and training guided his hands. Nearby, the captain barked orders into the night, voice steady despite the carnage, directing torpedoes toward targets that seemed to emerge from the darkness itself. On another ship, a Japanese crew performed their own lethal ballet. Torpedoes launched with deadly precision, maneuvering to exploit weaknesses, yet acutely aware that a single misstep could doom them. In these fleeting hours, courage and terror became inseparable, and the line between hunter and hunted dissolved into the black Pacific. The human cost was staggering. Ships that had survived daylight bombardments were ripped apart in moments. Sailors, many barely out of adolescence, leaped into freezing water to escape flames, clinging to floating debris, listening to the screams of comrades swallowed by darkness. Fires illuminated the night in stark, surreal bursts, reflections dancing across waves like restless ghosts. For survivors, each second was a test of endurance, each heartbeat a reminder of life's fragility. And yet, amid the destruction, acts of bravery endured. Men dove repeatedly into burning decks to rescue trapped shipmates. Radio operators held their posts as shells exploded around them. Medics worked tirelessly to staunch wounds, even as their own lives teetered on the edge. Night had become a teacher of resilience, and its lessons were written in fire, blood, and courage. The battle raged for hours, the ocean itself seeming alive, responding to chaos with waves that rocked ships and swallowed men whole. Torpedoes ruptured hulls, gunfire pierced decks, explosions scattered debris into the black water. Commanders made impossible decisions in the split seconds between life and death, weighing the fate of their men against the strategic necessity of victory. And through it all, technology, radar, sonar, coordinated fire control was only as good as the humans interpreting it. Machines were guides. Courage and quick thinking determined survival. As the night wore on, both sides countered losses, measured the cost of each decision, and realized that naval warfare had changed forever. The old rules daylight battles, visual spotting, reliance on sheer firepower had given way to a new reality. Darkness was no longer a hindrance. It was a medium, a weapon, a domain to be mastered. Commanders adapted, crews learned, and slowly the tide turned. American forces began to dominate night engagements, using radar-guided gunnery to anticipate enemy movements, coordinating torpedo strikes with deadly precision. Yet, victory was never clean. Wreckage floated among survivors, cries of the lost echoing across the water long after the battle had ended. By 1944, these lessons had been codified into doctrine. Night operations became standard practice, integrated with air power, intelligence, and advanced naval tactics. Destroyers and cruisers operated in formations optimized for darkness. Aircraft carriers launched reconnaissance and strike missions under moonless skies. Commanders studied radar returns and sonar pings as carefully as maps, understanding that in the absence of sight, knowledge and preparation were their greatest weapons. And still, the human element remained central. Courage, discipline, ingenuity, these were as decisive as the torpedoes and guns that had transformed night into a deadly theater. The legacy of these night battles extended far beyond immediate tactical victories. Naval architecture evolved, incorporating lessons learned under darkness, improved radar systems, reinforced hulls, innovations in damage control. Crew training emphasized readiness for night operations, with drills simulating the chaos of combat under limited visibility. Psychological preparation became essential, recognizing the strain and trauma inherent in fighting unseen. And perhaps most importantly, the stories of men who endured these nights. Ordinary sailors transformed into extraordinary warriors, passed into history, inspiring future generations and shaping our understanding of courage under fire. Even decades later, the ghostly outlines of sunken ships serve as monuments to the men who faced death in the unrelenting night. Divers exploring the wrecks speak of silence punctuated by eerie echoes, a reminder that the ocean preserves memory in ways both beautiful and haunting. The lessons of 1942 to 1944 echo in naval strategy to this day, a testament to the brutal clarity with which humans adapt when confronted with new and terrifying realities. Night, once a simple absence of light, had become a proving ground where skill, courage and resilience determined the fate of nations. For those who survived, the memories lingered forever. They remembered the shimmer of radar screens on otherwise pitch-black bridges, the distant roar of exploding shells, the weight of responsibility for every man under their command. They remembered the faces of comrades, some lost, some saved, and the fleeting moments of humanity that persisted even amidst hellish chaos. They knew that night had tested them in ways no day ever could, and that in those hours of darkness they had glimpsed the raw, unvarnished truth of war, that life and death are often separated by the smallest of margins, that courage is not the absence of fear, and that survival is sometimes nothing more than a choice repeated, moment by moment, in the face of overwhelming odds. When historians look back, when strategy manuals recount the evolution of naval warfare, the story is clear. The night changed everything. It challenged tradition, reshaped tactics, and forced humanity to innovate. It revealed life's fragility and the capacity for extraordinary courage. And it left an indelible mark on every sailor who dared traverse the blackened waves of the Pacific. By learning to fight in darkness, to see without seeing, and to act without hesitation, men turned night from a realm of fear into a weapon of war. The sun would rise again, as it always does, casting light on ruins, survivors, and stories that would outlast any vessel or shell. And in that light, the men of 1942 to 1944 understood a truth that would endure long after the guns fell silent in war. Mastery of the night could mean the difference between victory and oblivion, and the courage to face it defines history itself.